Western civilization in its world setting. Chapter 1, Cultural Evolution in Civilizations. There have always been men who have asked, where are we going? But never, it would seem, have there been so many of them. And surely never before have these myriads of questioners asked their question in such dolorous tones or rephrased their question in such despairing words, can man survive? Even on a less cosmic basis, questioners appear on all sides, seeking meaning or identity, or even, on the most narrowly egocentric basis, trying to find myself. One of these persistent questions is typical of the 20th century rather than of earlier times: can our way of life survive? Is our civilization doomed to vanish, as did that of the Incas, the Sumerians, and the Romans? From Giovanni Battista Vico in the early 18th century to Oswald Spengler in the early 20th century and Daniel J. Toynbee in our own day, men have been puzzling over the problem whether civilizations have a life cycle and follow a similar pattern of change. From this discussion has emerged a fairly general agreement that men live in separately organized societies, each with its own distinct culture, that some of these societies, having writing and city life, exist on a higher level of culture than the rest, and should be called by the different term civilizations, and that these civilizations tend to pass through a common pattern of experience. From these studies it would seem that civilizations pass through a process of evolution which can be analyzed briefly as follows. Each civilization is born in some inexplicable fashion and, after a slow start, enters a period of vigorous expansion, increasing its size and power, both internally and at the expense of its neighbors, until gradually a crisis of organization appears. When this crisis has passed and the civilization has been reorganized, it seems somewhat different. Its vigor and morale have weakened. It becomes stabilized and eventually stagnant. After a golden age of peace and prosperity, internal crises again arise. At this point there appears, for the first time, a moral and physical weakness which raises, also for the first time, questions about the civilization's ability to defend itself against external enemies. Racked by internal struggles of a social and constitutional character, weakened by loss of faith in its older ideologies and by the challenge of newer ideas incompatible with its past nature, the civilization grows steadily weaker until it is submerged by outside enemies, and eventually disappears. When we come to apply this process, even in this rather vague form, to our own civilization, Western civilization, we can see that certain modifications are needed. Like other civilizations, our civilization began with a period of mixture of cultural elements from other societies, formed these elements into a culture distinctly its own, began to expand with growing rapidity as others had done, and passed from this period of expansion into a period of crisis. But at that point the pattern changed. In more than a dozen other civilizations the age of expansion was followed by an age of crisis, and this, in turn, by a period of universal empire in which a single political unit ruled the whole extent of the civilization. Western civilization, on the contrary, did not pass from the age of crisis to the age of universal empire, but instead was able to reform itself and entered upon a new period of expansion. Moreover, Western civilization did this not once, but several times. It was this ability to reform or reorganize itself again and again which made Western civilization the dominant factor in the world at the beginning of the 20th century. As we look at the three ages forming the central portion of the life cycle of a civilization, we can see a common pattern. The age of expansion is generally marked by four kinds of expansion: 1. Of population, 2. Of geographic area, 3. Of production, and 4. Of knowledge. The expansion of production and the expansion of knowledge give rise to the expansion of population, and the three of these together give rise to the expansion of geographic extent. This geographic expansion is of some importance because it gives the civilization a kind of nuclear structure made up of an older core area, which had existed as part of the civilization even before the period of expansion, and a newer peripheral area, which became part of the civilization only in the period of expansion and later. If we wish, we can make, as an additional refinement, a third, semi-peripheral area between the core area and the fully peripheral area. These various areas are readily discernible in various civilizations of the past, and have played a vital role in historic change in these civilizations. In Mesopotamian civilization, 6000 BC. 300 BC. The core area was the lower valley of Mesopotamia, the semi-peripheral area was the middle and upper valley, while the peripheral area included the highlands surrounding this valley, and more remote areas like Iran, Syria, and even Anatolia. The core area of Cretan civilization, 3500 BC. 1100 BC. was the island of Crete, while the peripheral area included the Aegean Islands and the Balkan coasts. In classical civilization the core area was the shores of the Aegean Sea, the semi-peripheral area was the rest of the northern portion of the eastern Mediterranean Sea, while the peripheral area covered the rest of the Mediterranean shores and ultimately Spain, North Africa, and Gaul. In Canaanite civilization, 2200 BC. 100 BC. The core area was the Levant, while the peripheral area was in the western Mediterranean at Tunis, western Sicily, and eastern Spain. The core area of Western civilization, AD 400 to some time in the future, has been the northern half of Italy, France, the extreme western part of Germany, and England. The semi-peripheral area has been Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe and the Iberian Peninsula, while the peripheral areas have included North and South America, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and some other areas. This distinction of at least two geographic areas in each civilization is of major importance. The process of expansion, which begins in the core area, also begins to slow up in the core at a time when the peripheral area is still expanding. In consequence, by the latter part of the age of expansion, the peripheral areas of a civilization tend to become wealthier and more powerful than the core area. Another way of saying this is that the core passes from the age of expansion to the age of conflict before the periphery does. Eventually, in most civilizations the rate of expansion begins to decline everywhere. It is this decline in the rate of expansion of a civilization which marks its passage from the age of expansion to the age of conflict. This latter is the most complex, most interesting, and most critical of all the periods of the life cycle of a civilization. It is marked by four chief characteristics. A. It is a period of declining rate of expansion. B. It is a period of growing tensions and class conflicts. C. It is a period of increasingly frequent and increasingly violent imperialist wars. And D. It is a period of growing irrationality, pessimism, superstitions, and otherworldliness. All these phenomena appear in the core area of a civilization before they appear in more peripheral portions of the society. The decreasing rate of expansion of the age of conflict gives rise to the other characteristics of the age, in part at least. After the long years of the age of expansion, people's minds and their social organizations are adjusted to expansion. And it is a very difficult thing to readjust these to a decreasing rate of expansion. Social classes and political units within the civilization try to compensate for the slowing of expansion through normal growth by the use of violence against other social classes or against other political units. From this come class struggles and imperialist wars. The outcomes of these struggles within the civilization are not of vital significance for the future of the civilization itself. What would be of such significance would be the reorganization of the structure of the civilization so that the process of normal growth would be resumed. Because such a reorganization requires the removal of the causes of the civilization's decline. The triumph of one social class over another or of one political unit over another, within the civilization, will not usually have any major influence on the causes of the decline, and will not, except by accident, result in such reorganization of structure as will give rise to a new period of expansion. Indeed, the class struggles and imperialist wars of the age of conflict will probably serve to increase the speed of the civilization's decline because they dissipate capital and divert wealth and energies from productive to non-productive activities. In most civilizations their long-drawn agony of the age of conflict finally ends in a new period, the age of the universal empire. As a result of the imperialist wars of the age of conflict, the number of political units in the civilization are reduced by conquest. Eventually one emerges triumphant. When this occurs we have one political unit for the whole civilization. Just as the core area passes from the age of expansion to the age of conflict earlier than the peripheral areas, sometimes the core area is conquered by a single state before the whole civilization is conquered by the universal empire. When this occurs the core empire is generally a semi-peripheral state, while the universal empire is generally a peripheral state. Thus, Mesopotamia's core was conquered by semi-peripheral Babylonia about 1700 BC. While the whole of Mesopotamian civilization was conquered by more peripheral Assyria about 725 HC. Replaced by fully peripheral Persia about 525 BC. In classical civilization the core area was conquered by semi-peripheral Macedonia about 336 BC. While the whole civilization was conquered by peripheral Rome about 146 BC. In other civilizations the universal empire has consistently been a peripheral state even when there was no earlier conquest of the core area by a semi-peripheral state. In Mayan civilization, 1000 B.C.A.D. 1550, the core area was apparently in Yucatan and Guatemala, but the universal empire of the Aztecs centered in the peripheral highlands of central Mexico. In Andean civilization, 1500 B.C.A.D. 1600, the core areas were on the lower slopes and valleys of the central and northern Andes, but the universal empire of the Incas centered in the highest Andes, a peripheral area. The Canaanite civilization, 2200 B.C. 146 BC, had its core area in the Levant, but its universal empire, the Punic Empire, centered at Carthage in the western Mediterranean. If we turn to the Far East we see no less than 3 civilizations. Of these the earliest, Cynic civilization, rose in the valley of the Yellow River after 2000 BC. Culminated in the Qin and Han empires after 200 BC. And was largely destroyed by Ural-Altaic invaders after AD 400. From this Cynic civilization, in the same way in which classical civilization emerged from Cretan civilization or Western civilization emerged from classical civilization, there emerged 2 other civilizations, a Chinese civilization, which began about AD 400, culminated in the Manchu Empire after 1644, and was disrupted by European invaders in the period 1790 to 1930, and b. Japanese civilization, which began about the time of Christ, culminated in the Tokugawa Empire after 1600. And may have been completely disrupted by invaders from Western civilization in the century following 1853. In India, as in China, 2 civilizations have followed one another. Although we know relatively little about the earlier of the 2, the later, as in China, culminated in a universal empire ruled by an alien and peripheral people. Indic civilization, which began about 3500 BC. Was destroyed by Aryan invaders about 1700 BC. Hindu civilization, which emerged from Indic civilization about 1700 BC. Culminated in the Mughal Empire and was destroyed by invaders from Western civilization in the period 1500 to 1900.